Evening. So welcome to this shir on Parshas, this Erev Shabbos Parshas Nitzavim, last shir of this year on Zoom, that is, with our forum, Tovshin Pei Aleph. And I'm going to start off with sharing with you. I had a phone call about 2 hours ago. Someone from Thailand called me and he says he listens to the shir on a regular basis, which is very touched. And he has a problem in Thailand. They're totally under lockdown. So what do they do with Hatosh Dorim? He's actually not in Bangkok, he's in a rather remote place, relatively speaking. And I told him that you could do Hatosh Dorim over the phone. Apparently in Bangkok, they would be able to get 3 Rabbonim together. So I said, if that's the case, do it over the phone or over Zoom. And my source for this is that we have in the Dinim of Nedorim a question whether you could do a Hatoras Nedorim over the phone. By letter. So going 200-300 years ago, the question was raised: can you send your request for Hatoras Nedorim? Could you do that by a letter, or do you have to be there in person? And so there's a bit of to and fro in that. That is enough for me to say, if they are entertaining that you could even do Hatoras Nedorim by letter, so by phone, by Zoom, when necessary, I think Hatoras Nedorim would be okay, especially the minig of Hatoras Nedorim of Erev Rosh Hashanah. So I told him to do that. And so he felt very relieved. Okay, let's go on to our list of questions which we have today. And so the first thing we have here is someone asks me, what's the reason why in the chapter of Tehillim, which we say in Lamnat Seach of Yancho, we have here haMoed uven follow, and here we have in what we say in Adovat Hashem Oiri during this month and a half, etc. So we say haMoed uven follow. He's just asking simply, what's the difference? Why does it say haMoed uven follow, which means they kneeled and fell? And in the other one, it says haMoed uven follow. They stumbled and fell. So, and I actually did not find in the Meforshim that they should address this. So I'm just suggesting the following. The preceding pasuk in chapter Chof, in chapter 20, is Eile vorecha ve'eile vasusim. The other ones they are chasing with chariots and with horses, and we invoke the name of Hashem. And Hashem Nazkir, haMoed uven follow. They knelt and fell, and we will rise and we are encouraged. So there it's talking about very much a physical pursuit that they are chasing with horses and chariots. And therefore the fall is described also in very physical terms. They knelt and fell. It's a physical falling. In the chapter 27, so it talks here about my enemies, they've kind of gathered around me. Lechel is sorry to eat my flesh. Sorry, my enemies, my oppressors. Here it's talking about not so much physical, but they have kind of all ganged up on me and they're scheming to harm me. And so here we, instead of using the word koru, that they physically knelt and fell, we say koshlev follow. They become confounded, and their plans are disturbed and confused, rather than a physical koru and a fall. It's koshlev. That means their plans do not materialize. Let's move on. So this was quite new to me. In the beginning of the week, someone sends me a question about using rice paper, and the way I understand is it's made from rice and it's used for preparing for presentation of food, and I presume it's edible. In order to use it, though, you have to first soak it, then it becomes flexible. Otherwise, it's like a very thin wafer, and it would crumble if you'd bend it. So you have to stick it in water. I don't know, the warm water or cold water, I don't know. I don't remember exactly. Then it becomes flexible, then you can use it. So are you allowed to do this on Shabbos? So I'm just looking here this is in Siman Shin Mem, Sif Yud Zayin, where the Alter Rebbe says you are allowed to cutting something on Shabbos is only osur if you actually want to have a specific size. You may remember a couple of weeks ago, I was talking about Rav Forkash's position about plastic rots, cutting off pieces of plastic tablecloth. So this, I think, is the same sif which we used then, that the actual cutting itself is not a problem. It's cutting to a measure, like a shoemaker would cut leather to make sandals. But then Alter Rebbe says, "Im al yedezeh," the third line, if by doing so, by cutting it, you're making it usable, if you are cutting it and now it's become usable, then that's a tikkun keli. That's if you're fixing a keli. So let's say if you would take a piece of wood and whittle it to make it into a toothpick, that would be making a keli, as was discussed in Shin Chov Beis Gabe Ketimas Kesam, whereby the whittling of making a toothpick, etc. Shloi Besakin, if you're not using a knife, so then Potter Aval also, it's not such a professional job, a full job, and therefore it's also awesome Rabbanim. And the Alter Rebbe continues, Lefichoch ein shoivrinus acheres. You're not allowed to break a shard of earthenware. Ve'ein koire ines hanyor amatorim betiltu. You're not allowed to tear paper, which is not muksa. You want to, as I mentioned last time, you have a large piece of paper and you want to wipe your nose, let's say. So you want to tear off a reasonable sized piece. That wouldn't be allowed to do so on Shabbos or Yom Tov, because you're fixing a keli. The end of that siman, I've skipped a few lines. The Alter Rebbe brings also machat shenis akmo, if a needle was bent out of shape, osul foshto, to straighten the needle, because it's a straight needle you could sew easily if it's bent, you have to go, you're going around in circles kind of thing. And you're not allowed to straighten a needle, mishum tikkun keli, because you're fixing a keli. For that matter, so for example, sometimes someone sat down on your glasses and they're a bit out of shape. To bend your glasses back into shape on Shabbos is forbidden, because you are fixing a keli. So coming back, my perception is that this rice paper, I wouldn't look at it as so much as paper. I see it more as a form of keli to hold stuff together, and therefore I felt that soaking it to make it manageable as a wrapper would not be allowed because of tikkun keli. Let's go on to something which is much more relevant to all of us, and that is about Shemitah. And the coming year is Shemitah, and there's two areas. The word Shemitah means to let slip. So we have Shmitas Karka and Shmitas Kesofim. Shmitas Karka means to leave the land fallow. And then we have Shmitas Kesofim, which means if someone owes you money, so you waive the debt. And so this is an amnesty for debts. Towards the end of the time of the second Beis Hamikdash, in the times of Hillel, some 80 years before the Churban, so it became apparent, although the Torah says you shouldn't have any foreign thoughts, any nasty thoughts, I'm not going to lend money because I'm going to have to waive the debt, but it looked like it wasn't working, and it was close to Shemitah, and people, the poor people who needed to have loans, they weren't getting loans. And so that was all the various excuses which were coming their way. But the fact was they weren't getting the loans. The Torah Hashem instituted the mitzvah of Shemitah for the benefit of these poor people, and it was backfiring. So Hillel saw the need to find a way that people would be able to get loans, and the lenders would not be worried about getting their money back. And so he instituted the concept of prusbul, which means a clause. The full word is prusbuli yubuti, a clause for the rich and for the poor. So, and the idea is that you transfer your debts to the Bezdin. So personal debts mustn't be collected in Shemitah, or post-Shemitah rather, but if they are transferred to the Bezdin, then it's not your personal debt, it belongs to the Bezdin. And that was the loophole which was introduced. And so this is what we're going to be learning about these next few lines. It talks about the idea of and this is the Alter Rebbe in Hilchos Halvor, in Hilchos Mishpat. And here the Alter Rebbe recommends, which actually most poskim don't take this view, it is a view of Rishonim, Zman ha-prusbul hu lechatchila b'soif hashishis lifnei Rosh Hashanah shel Shvius. The time for prusbul is primarily, it should be done the end of the 6th year, which is between now and Rosh Hashanah, before the Rosh Hashanah of the 7th year. Although the waiver of Shemitah comes into full effect only at the end, as it says, that the waiver comes in at the end of the 7 years. Yes, there are, however, some Rishonim who learn there's one thing about waiving a debt, and one thing is about whether you're allowed to ask for the money. And so although the waiver only comes into effect at the end of next year, but there are those who say that you wouldn't be allowed to demand payment even in this coming year. Shenemar, as it says a pasuk, Yigos Esrei Ehu Ves Ochiv, he should not oppress his fellow and his brother, Kikoro Shmita Lashem, because it's proclaimed as Shmita. So that seems to tell us, Miyad Shikoro Shmita Lashem, as soon as it is proclaimed as Shmita, Lo Yigos. So true that the amnesty comes into force at the end of next year, but there is this approach that the issue of demanding payment would already start from this Rosh Hashanah. So what's the difference? That if the borrower comes to you voluntarily during the coming year, you don't have to declare, I waive the debt. So after next Rosh Hashanah, in other words, once we were into Tov Shin Pei Gimel, if someone would come along to pay an old debt, then you'd have to actually say, oh, I've waived that debt. There's a Dvar HaShmita, there's the word of Shmita, which Chazal explains, you'd have a duty to say, I waive that debt. That chiyuv, to say I waive the debt, that kicks in Tov Pei Gimel. But what we're seeing at the moment is that within Tov Pei Beis, you wouldn't be allowed to press for payment. Now, that's why there is the value of making the prusbul now, before the beginning of Shemitah. If for whatever reason you didn't do a prusbul during between now and Rosh Hashanah, then you should make a prusbul during the year of Shvius, during next year, ad Rosh Hashanah Shematzoi Shvius, until the year of till next Rosh Hashanah, end of Pei Beis, Rosh Hashanah Pei Gimel. And he tells us that Shnas HaShemitah, also Shnas Tov Kuf Mem Daled, he tells us which in around his time, when was the last time it was Shemitah? Or the next time? Yeah, the last time. Okay, so that's one point. This now we've understood that the Alter Rebbe's point is very clear, that Shemitah, prusbul should be done now. That would allow us during the coming year, if we're owed money, to press for that payment. Now, here comes another detail, and that is that prusbul, how does it work exactly? So we said that you transfer the debts to the Besdin, and there's another little detail, and that is, ach ein prusbel moyel ela imken yesh karka kolshu la loive oidova mukubel karka, that the prusbel is only effective if the borrower owns land. Now let's explain this. If the borrower has land, then you could say like this. My name is Reuven. I lent £100 to Shimon. I lent him £10,000. I lent Shimon £10,000. Shimon has got a plot of land the size of a tennis ball. How much is that piece of land worth? Is it worth £10, £100, £500? So there is a principle that eino noah lekarkos. There's no that it could be if that piece of land was needed for some kind of project, and it's in the way of it could be extremely overvalued. All right, so Shimon has got a piece of land the size of a tennis ball. He owes me £10,000. So one could say, well, that plot of land, that tennis ball piece of land, is as if it's mine already because he can't walk off with it. Wherever it is, it's mine. That plot of land is mine because he owes me the money. And because there's no overvaluing of land as such, so I could say, well, I've gotten my £10,000. I've already gotten it because that plot of land, that piece of tennis ball piece of land is already mine. And with this, I have already gotten my £10,000. Now, if Shimon wants to take it back, well, if I say he'll pay the £10,000 in cash, and then I will release that plot of land back to him. This is the thinking behind it. That the prusbul, it's like of course, we said this idea of it being given over to Besdin, but this is like the belt and braces. There's another understanding of it, that because the borrower has land, it can be seen as if the lender has already gotten his payment in full before Shmita, and therefore there's no problem of the debt being cancelled because it's actually he's been paid before Shmita. So let's read that again. One of the underpinnings of the clause of prusbul is that the borrower owns land. It could be he owns the third floor flat, which is kapitelac, which is attached to the ground. And so then the idea is that it can't be walked off with. Even if it's only on loan, only rental, that's also considered he owns land, and that's good enough for a prusbul. Now, most people who you lend money to, either they own property or they have dwellings, and so they're living in a property by rent. So then, therefore, the prusbul works with most people. There could be someone like a child who's living with parents, and could very well be they've borrowed money and they don't have any land at all. In that case, that's where we have, if your borrower doesn't have any land at all, then then the lender can give the borrower a piece of land, and it can be done by means of someone else, even without his awareness. Okay, let's not go into that whole thing. Meanwhile, we've got here, we've discussed the prusbul, and we discussed that the borrower should have land. Practically, when are we going to do prusbul? So, as it's printed in the Kahos Machzer, the new one, the new annotated edition, it has so we have there the after Hatoras Nedorim, of the absolving of vows, which is done on Erev Rosh Hashanah in the morning. So then we will say that I transfer to you, the Besdin, all the debts which are owing to me, that I should be able to collect the Chol Eitz She'ertz whenever I wish. Now, the Rebbe did encourage that there should be forms of prusbul to be circulated, and that is because although men who are going to shul will be able to do a prusbul in the presence of the Bezdin by Hataras Nedorim, there are people now, if it's a husband and wife, then usually the assets are shared, and therefore the prusbul for the husband will also be a prusbul for anything which the wife has lent out. But what about people who are single and not coming to shul? There are single men who don't come to shul. There's certainly single women who don't come to shul. So how will they be able to do a prusbul? And so the Rebbe did encourage that there should be a printed form which should be circulated. And if you did get the program, the agenda for today, I put on a link of haMoed.org, which is based in New York, in the United States, has a form online which is available. And also here in London, or Greater London, in Edgware, if you go to Chabad of Edgware, on their website, you will also find there's a form to fill out for prusbul. So then there you are. If there's someone who is not going to be in shul on Erev Rosh Hashanah, so you want to do the prusbul, so go to either haMoed.org or to Chabad of Edgware, or perhaps there are other places there. Also, I see in some calendars, you have there a form for a prusbul. You fill out the form, and you've done the thing. In the Sikha, which they ever spoke about this, he encourages this, and he says, in addition, that there may be people who don't have land, and the Rabbonim will find the way to be makne, to give those people a bit of land so that the prusbul should be effective. Let's move on. So someone asks me this week, the Yehirotzen, which is said before Tchias Shofar, is it said by the Baal Tekeya alone, or is it said by everyone? And so there was a bit of a confusion about this, which is probably what brought him to ask the question. Now, on the bottom right, you can see here's a quote from Likutei Sichos volume 39, and there is that classic Sikha where the Rebbe talks about the Loshen of the Alter Rebbe in the Siddur, where he says that the Baal Tekeya should gear up, he should prepare himself for Tchias Shofar. And he discusses at length, what does it mean that he is preparing himself for Tchias Shofar? And he says, it doesn't mean saying the Lamnat Seyach 7 times over, because that's everyone. And it looks like here we're talking about the Baal Tekeya as an individual should be preparing himself. And then, so here we have this specific note. That the Alter Rebbe B'Sidurei brings he quotes the Yehirotzen, Heretic B'Sidurei. It means the Alter Rebbe did not compose this tefillah. He's copied it from earlier sources. And the Rebbe adds that is the Baal Tekeya. Now this Yehirotzen is said by the Baal Tekeya, and the source of this is in Pri Etz Chaim, which is referred earlier in the Sikha to, and in Siddur Arizal. And then the Alter Rebbe also brings a Yehirotzen after the Tchias, which is said by everyone. Okay. Now, I just want to give you a moment. Let's take a look at this tefillah. Now, what's happening over here is that you've got some names, some holy shemus, holy names of Hashem, or perhaps I'm not sure about but it is. They are words which we don't want to utter because of their extreme kedusha, and therefore we say various words which their abbreviation forms the shame which we want to bring out. So there you've got the Aleph Nun Kuf Tov Mem, and Pei Samech Sof Mem, and then Pei Samech Yud Mem. And then we have another fourth shame, which is Dal Yud Vav Nun Samach Yud Mem. And these are, Yud Mem. And these are Shemus Api Kabbalah. And by saying this Yirotzim, we're invoking those particular Shemus which are come out from the Rosh Hashanah. You don't say those words. In other words, you don't say the hidden words. You say the words which are printed, and the Eibishter takes and sorts out and gets the Rosh Hashanah out of it, similar to what we're doing by Ona B'choyach every day, twice a day or more, where we say Ona B'choyach, and the main thing is really the abbreviation, which is in the Siddur on the left side of the page. The person also asked, what about the vidui between the stanzas of the Tkiyas? So here we have V'yisvada b'lachash, V'yisvada b'lachash. One should say confession silently and undertone. So here, this is from the Oitz Minig Chabad on the lower left of your page. So who's meant to be saying this confession b'lachash quietly? So it quotes here that there was a conversation at the Rebbe's table, and where it was said once that it's only applicable for the Baal Tekeya. And then he says another time the conversation said that perhaps it does belong for everyone. So it's not so clear. What I would want to tell you is the following: in earlier Sidurim, there was a Yehirotzon, which is there after Tashrat, another Yehirotzon after Tashat, and a third Yehirotzon after Tarat. So after each of those sets was a separate Yehirotzon, and with Kavonas and etc. One was a gematria of a Yohanovi Zochul Atoiv, and etc. Now, what then seems to have developed is that the poskim said, no, wait a minute. You're making a bracha l'shmoa kol shofar. You're blowing these various tkiyas, and the reason why we do the three sets, is because in case one is not valid, the other one should be valid. So why are you interrupting with a yehirotzim, with a prayer? You shouldn't be interrupting with anything. So then those yehirotzims became obsolete and kind of put together the one which is after the tkiyas are all finished. Then we have a yehirotzim which is said by everyone. Then this V'yisvad b'lachash. So the way we see in the various sichos, etc., the V'yisvad b'lachash is not actually said physically. And there's a sikh of the Rebbe. He says on Rosh Hashanah we do not say vidui. Rosh Hashanah is a time in the sense of Kabbalas HaMalchus, and it's an elated time. And to say vidui is expressing remorse. So we don't say Oshamnu over Rosh Hashanah. In our Avinu Malkeinu, we miss out the pieces of Chatonu Lefonecha, etc. Here in Tkiyas, if there is the need, it's suppressed. V'yisvad b'lachash. And as I said, the poil, we don't even say it quiet. It's just b'machshava. Then there is an idea which is written in the Sichos. What is the V'yisvad b'lachash? To visualize the Pnei Harav, number one, and number two, or whichever way to order it is, a kind of a resolve that to be totally different, to be a totally bottle to the Ratzon of Hashem, and so it's a moment of total commitment. That's the V'yisvad b'lachash, total bitul and total commitment. So that's the V'yisvad b'lachash. Right. So does this belong to everyone? So there you see. Is that just for the Baal Tekeya, or is it for everyone? Not totally clear, and there's no harm. Everyone else also, in that short pause between the set of Tashrat and Tashat, and between Tashat and Tarat, a short pause, and to be Mitzayah Pnei Harav and try to bring oneself to that frame of mind of a bitul and total commitment. Let's move on. So now we've got this question. We have the tradition of saying 3 chapters of Tehillim extra per day throughout El, going up through till Erev Yom Kippur, and Yom Kippur we have another 36 to make up the full Tehillim. So let's read this inside. This is from the Friedrich Rebbe's writing, which is in the back of the Tehillim on Yosef Yitzchak, and this is quoting the Alter Rebbe that I received from my master, the Mizritcher Maggid, who received from his master, the Baal Shem Tov, who received from his master, Hayadua, referring to Achia Shiloni, from the second day of Rosh Chodesh Elul, which in other words from Aleph Elul through to Yom Kippur, he wants to say every day, sometime during the day, 3 chapters of Tehillim. On Yom Kippur, you do 36 chapters, 9 before Kol Nidre, 9 before going to sleep, 9 after Musaf, and 9 after Ne'ilah. Right. Then he says the following: if someone did not start this program of Tehillim on time, so then Yaschil ba'oise yom shu oimid bay. So let's say on Chof Elul, you realize, oops, what happened to the 3 kapitelac? Okay, if it's Chof, so you'll say kapitel Nun Ches, Nun Tes, and Samech, and then Yashlim. And what about the other 50-odd chapters you missed? Okay, you'll catch up. But basically, I think he doesn't mean you shouldn't catch up 3 kapitelac per day. Basically, we try to keep it to 3 chapters a day. And if you start late, so that which you missed, you will make up gradually. So the question was, why is it, let's say if you missed Parsha Chumash, so then the advice there is given, first do yesterday's and then do today's. If you are behind in Rambam, for example, well, it would make sense, and perhaps there's guidance one way or the other, but why is it that here we're saying, no, start where you would start at chapter Nun Ches, and then the other ones you'll catch up later. And I think the explanation is fairly simple, that Chumash has got a very clear sequence, and therefore it makes sense to keep to that sequence and first do Sheni and then Shlishi. It would make sense also in Rambam, although in Rambam the guidance may be a little bit different, but in Rambam is very much there's a sequence. This is presented first, and this comes later, and etc. With the Tehillim, the sequence, I think, is not as rigid. There's certainly a sequence, no question about that, but it's not as compelling, so to speak, and therefore it's okay to say these chapters of Tehillim now and catch up that which you missed at a later occasion. That's what I'm just suggesting, that the sequence of Tehillim is a little bit more flexible, or the word dispensable is not the right word, but okay. Okay, let's go on. Now, you may remember the question which I discussed about someone who had to move house, and he was asking whether he could move house on Chol haMoed. And the answer was no, you're not allowed to. It's a Mishnah, and it's a Shobot and Shulchan Aruch, that you wouldn't be allowed to move house on Chol haMoed. So the same fine gentleman asked me, what about during the free time which he has during Chol haMoed, would he be allowed to pack boxes during Chol haMoed? So I think packing boxes involves various melachas. Usually you get your boxes, they're flat packs, and you use thick packing tape to make your boxes, which is sticking things, making things. And it's certainly no question a very big melacha to move house. Certainly if you've been living in one place for several years, it's a very big job. I'm not talking about emotionally, just talking physically, it's a very big job. And so it's certainly a tircha yisera. And I felt it's not correct to do this in Chol haMoed, because the reason for not moving house that's the reason for, because of tirchi yaseo, excessive effort. And therefore the same thing, packing the boxes would be in the same category. But I was still curious to find someone to give me support on that, or to say the opposite, I don't mind. And so I found through a search that Rav Elyashiv Zal, who was not asked about packing to move house. This is from a sefer of someone who put very many questions to Rav Elyashiv and wrote them down. There are questions and answers. So he says, I asked the following: if someone is traveling overseas in Chol haMoed, is he allowed to pack his affairs on his pack his suitcases on Chol haMoed, or do you say no, packing suitcases is too much of an effort? To which Rav Elyashiv answered, Stam mizvadot, just regular suitcases, that's okay. But to pack suitcases with sforim or similar, that's considered an excessive effort. And he said those should be packed before Yom Tov. So I've got some kind of backing here to say that one shouldn't be doing packing for transportation. That should not be done during Chol haMoed. Okay, let's move on. So I was last Shabbos, this past Shabbos, I was in Hadich. That's the Alter Rebbe's Zion, the Alter Rebbe's gravesite, and it was the Shabbos following from Chayelul. There's a Shabbos of Slichus, and many shluchim from around the Ukraine came there with their mukuravim. It was very beautiful to see. You may be familiar that they've got this whole network called Chol Torah, whereby they invite the local people, more so those are a bit older or people who are not fully employed, and they get paid for coming to learn, and they can use this money which they get for learning. They can buy kosher food. It's really made a massive changeover in these Yidden's lives to become so much more involved. They've got also for women, and it's really these Chol Torah have made a massive changeover in the communities in all these small places around Ukraine and Russia and beyond. So I saw this with my own eyes, these poshety Yidden, blue shirts, jeans, etc. And they were there and by davening, etc. So one of the shluchim who came from one of these towns in Ukraine, he discussed with me this dilemma. He, especially in summer, he will start Shabbos early. And so someone had raised with him the problem. If you make Shabbos early and you're the only shul in town, so if you're the only shul in town, if you're Makabel Shabbos, so let's say Shabbos would come in at 8 o'clock. You're Makabel Shabbos at 7 o'clock. It's your prerogative. But you know what? When you're Makabel Shabbos, that means all the Yidden in town it becomes Shabbos for them. So you've got 20 Yidden in shul, let's say, and you got 1,000 Yidden in town, and many of them are not Shomer Shabbos. But by you making Shabbos an hour earlier, you're causing all of those Yidden to be Mechal Shabbos an extra hour. So you shouldn't be doing starting Shabbos early. That was the problem which he discussed with me. I didn't feel he's right at all. I didn't feel there's an objection there at all. And just to explain where I'm coming from. There may be one kind of political take on this. Listen, I've got the people who I'm catering for directly. And that should be my focus. The fact that there are other people out of sight, do I have to worry about them? Well, that could be one attitude. It's not necessarily such a Lubavitch attitude, not to worry about the other people. Then you're going to say, well, then Mechal Shabbos in any case. And so what? There's a beautiful story of the Rebbe with a person who had a what we call a chemist. What do they call them there? In America, they call them pharmacy. And he insisted that he cannot close for Shabbos. So the Rebbe said to him in conversation, what time do you open? So he says I open every day at 9 o'clock. The Rebbe said, try to leave the house 1 minute later than usual. Perhaps later, 2 minutes later. Now, not only is it a miut chil Shabbos, but here's an amazing insight. This minute, he's sitting at home and he's looking at the clock. I'm waiting a minute because I'm going. Why is he waiting that minute? Shmiras Shabbos. So he's going to go through a moment of Shmiras Shabbos in that minute, which is a gewaldige thing. So to say that because they're not Shomer Shabbos, it doesn't matter, that obviously is not a consideration for us. But here there's a fascinating thing. This idea that the Kabbalah Shabbos of the community obliges everyone in town. Where does this come from? So this is something which is written in Rishonim. It's based upon the minhag, which was in the times of the Mishnah and the Gemara, where in a town they would have someone going up to a tower and blowing a shofar, and they would blow 6 tekiyas, sheish tekiyas toikin. The first 3 were to alert the people out in the fields that they should come back into town, and the latter 3, there was an interval between the first 3 and the latter 3. The latter 3 were to say that now is Shabbos, and after the 3rd of the latter set, in other words, the 6th here, then he just has to put down the shofar and it's Shabbos. So there you have the idea of a communal acceptance of Shabbos. And so the Rishonim say that the Kabbalah Shabbos in the shul is the equivalent of the 6th of those tekiyos which were done on Erev Shabbos, and that's I'm binding on it. Now, what you have in front of you on the screen is the last is the last piece of a long tshuva, a letter of Reb Moshe Feinstein in Nigras Moshe, Gimel of Erechaim, Sef Simalamed Ches. His first part of his conversation is about a wife and husband, where the husband wants to daven Ma'ariv early, was Mekabel Shabbos early, and the wife is not ready yet. So the Moshe takes the following position, that although, yes, there are poskim who say that it's not, Alter Rebbe doesn't mention this, but there are poskim who say that a wife should be Mekabel Shabbos when her husband is Mekabel Shabbos. Usually it's the other way around. The woman's Mekabel Shabbos first, and the husband later. But here, if he's Mekabel Shabbos early, she should also, says the Moshe, that's only if he's Mekabel Shabbos early because of Hidur Mitzvah. If he is being extra vigilant, Mekabel Mitzvah and Mekabel Shabbos early, she should also go along with him. But if he's Mekabel Shabbos early because he wants to eat supper early, so it's not for a sacred, a holy purpose, it's just for a mundane purpose, then she's not obliged to, as we say in Yiddish, noch tanzen. She's not obliged to be, she's not bound by his early Kabbalah Shabbos. First out, number one, many poskim disagree with Reb Moshe. Number two, I'd like to say, even if you are going to take that view, people sometimes need to rely on this, I tell them that it does not make sense for the husband to come home from shul and she hasn't lit Shabbos candles. Although she may not be bound by his early acceptance of Shabbos, it certainly would be absolutely advisable that she should accept Shabbos in good time before the husband comes home. At any rate, this is the first part of the tshuva of Reb Moshe. Then he goes on about shuls, and if there's several shuls in a town, then what if there's only one shul in town? Then it is binding upon everyone. Well, this is the last piece. Gam mesupkani bekabola kazoi she'ein lo kavonas mitzvah. I have my doubts about an acceptance of Shabbos early of a community, or a congregation, which is not for a mitzvah purpose. Perhaps the minority are not dictated to by the majority. There in the source in Rishonim, it's talking when they were Mekabel Shabbos for the purpose of increasing the Kedusha of Shabbos. I'm listing the last three lines. But not when the reason why they accepted Shabbos early is nothing to do with the mitzvah. Even if there's only a single shul. Possibly those who are not in shul would not be bound by those who makabel Shabbos in shul. All right, so therefore, coming back to our story in Ukraine, in this town, to say that because they are makabel Shabbos early, therefore they are causing everyone else to be makabel Shabbos, and therefore they're causing them chilul Shabbos. I think it's all of it is going to the extreme, and I would be more inclined to say cater for the people who are there. The people who are beyond the shul, you can rely on Moshe. They're not makabel Shabbos early because you're makabel Shabbos early for your 20 people, and don't worry about. And of course, do whatever you can to encourage them to be makabel Shabbos and keep Shabbos, but not reason to not cater for your people and to say no, we have to be daven very late and probably ruin your minyan as a result. I'm reading here from one of the chats. As to making Shabbos early, does it not depend on when his wife lights her candles and brings Shabbos in, or are they separate? What if the wife has to make Shabbos? Well, no, a man is not bound by when his wife lights candles. Many people, their wife lights candles in good time before Shabbos, and they will perhaps use the car to go to shul after that. They carry things if they walk. So no, a man is not dependent on when his wife lights the candles. It would be the other way around. If he's makabel Shabbos early, she would have to makabel Shabbos early also, ideally. Okay, finally, the last thing which we have on our list for today, and if we finish a couple of minutes early, I'm sure everyone will forgive me, and that is about using sharp foods for over Rosh Hashanah. Right, so the first line you have here is from the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch. The second quote is from the Aruch HaShulchan. Aruch HaShulchan was about 150 years ago, possibly. He did spend time with the Tzemach Tzedek, apparently. He was the Rav in Navardik, so he wasn't a chassid as such, but a very respected posek back in the day in Lita. All right, so there were Rishonim who did not eat fish on Rosh Hashanah. They had their reasons. It's an extra indulgence, and they didn't eat fish. But then here the Alter Rebbe says, "V'yesh ochlim dogim." To the contrary, we have Siman Tov Kuf Pei Gimel talks about the various foods which we eat on Rosh Hashanah for Siman Tov, and there are those who do make a point of eating fish, so that lifrois v'lirbos kadogim, that we should be multiplying, be fruitful like fish. There's a whole idea that fish are beyond ayin hara, etc. But then, having said that we do eat fish, one shouldn't cook the fish in vinegar. So we have an idea, and here comes from, this is the source of not having sharp foods, bitter foods over Rosh Hashanah, and some go, many people are accustomed to continue with this all the way through till Hoshana Rabbah. So the chrein is not used, and various other sharp foods wouldn't be used because of this halacha of not cooking b'chometz. The question is, how far does this go, and what about so the svara, which we're going to read in a moment, is to just differentiate. If the end product is indeed a sour taste, whatever, a sharp taste, then indeed we would be noyeg to avoid such a food. But if it's a sharp ingredient, or a spice, very strong spice, but it's in another food, and the end product is actually a pleasant tasting, easier food. It's just that this is part of the way you put it together. So then there's reason to be makel. So now let's read. This is from the Aruch HaShulchan. V'yesh she'ein mitablin b'chometz. There are those who are accustomed not to dip the food in vinegar. Ve'ein L'oichlim dvorim chamutzim, and don't eat sour foods. B'layla rishon, the first night of Rosh Hashanah. As I said, many have stretched this through the whole of Aseret Tshuva all the way through Hashanah Rabbah. V'lo dvorim hamorim, neither sour nor bitter foods. Then he adds, Ve'ein bichlal zeh pilpulin shenoisnin lema'cholim. I think when he says pilpulin, I think he means pepper. Don't include in this the pepper which is added to foods. The haMoed hamachol k'meidogim. They are used for seasoning the food, like for example fish. She'i efshar sheleochlon b'lei pilpulin. Without that bit of pepper, they're not really edible. So what he's saying is that to cook food in vinegar, that indeed would not be done, because that would make it give the fish a sour taste. But to have a bit of pepper, which is going to make an overall a pleasant tasting food, not a sharp tasting food, that would be okay. I just want to finish off. If you remember last week, or was it 2 weeks ago? I don't remember. We had this discussion about someone who's got only a pomegranate. We've got one pomegranate, and well, and his dilemma is: do I use it the first night for Siman Tov, or do I use it the second night for Pri Chodosh? And what I had suggested was that the Pri Chodosh is much less less important than the Siman Tov, because the Siman Tov is a concept which is mentioned in the Gemara, and the Pri Chodosh is a suffix which is mentioned in Achronim, so it's a lesser issue. So someone wrote to me quite a few ha'oros about this, and he said an interesting comment. The general custom is to have the Siman Tov, the Simonim, the apple and the honey and all that, just the first night, not the second night. Why don't we have it the second night? So the answer is simple: because you already had it the first night, you don't have to have it twice. But what happens if you didn't have it for the first night? So then you can have it. You should have it the second night. All right. So then, in the case with these pomegranates, with the pomegranate fella, if for whatever reason he's only got this thing and he wants to hold it on for the second night to be able to use it for Shehecheyanu, well, he can use it for Shehecheyanu and also for the Siman Tov. In other words, who says the Siman Tov has to be dafka the first night? Perhaps it can equally be done later, and normally we do it as soon as we can. But if there's a reason to delay it, as in this case, that may be legitimate. Okay, listen, Baruch Hashem, most of us are in circumstances where we have been able to have the Simonim Tovim the first night, and to have a Pri Chodosh the second night, or a Beged Chodosh, and so it's nice to be mefalpel about these things. The finish off now. I'm wishing you all a ksiva v'chsima tova, lashana tova v'sukkah, and we should meet with one another in good health. And the we should have a shnas geula. We be reicha to pasha the geula, Mashiach tzidkenu, l'mata mesar tochim, mamash now. Kultiv.
Sky